All right. Glad everybody's with us, right? We're going to go ahead and get started, right? So importantly, just ground rules, right? As we move into this, right? Please keep your mic muted unless you're speaking. The majority of folks, the way we've set up this webinar, are going to prohibit you from unmuting yourself, right? Importantly, as we go, right, we're happy to collect your thoughts and questions in the chat, right? We'll circle back to them, particularly, and also to in understanding what we're doing and what we're about to do, right? We just want to make sure that we're assuming good intent, right, and that we're respecting all voices, right? And so one of the things that we're going to do today is tackling the real numbers, what works, right, and an idea of how we move forward. Right. So just to make sure you are in the right place, right? This is the state of homelessness in New Jersey, right? In particular, in recent developments, right? And we're having a fact-based conversation, right, with all of you, right, our community stakeholders on homelessness in New Jersey. Right. So importantly, right, the purpose, right? So what we're really here for is to level set, right, on homelessness in New Jersey and the emerging federal landscape. Right. We're going to take a deep dive into some all source data on homelessness in New Jersey. Right. This includes data that's beyond, just HMIS and things like that. Right. We're going to understand implications, right, from some select stakeholder groups that we've invited to the call. And we're going to outline strategies for continuity and also hear from advocates. Right. So your presenters today, right, so will be Janelle Winter, Assistant Commissioner Director of the Division of Housing and Community Resources, Renee Kubiatis, Senior Policy Advisor at DHCR, Michael Callahan, myself, I'm the Director of the Office of Homelessness Prevention, Thaisa Kelly, who's the CEO of Monarch Housing Associates, Kate Kelly, the Executive Director of the Supportive Housing Association of New Jersey, and Matt Hirsch, who is the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at the Housing and Community Development Network of New Jersey, also affectionately known as the Network. Just so folks know, right? Your moderators, right, and your team, right here at the good OHP, right? Tina McGill, Assistant Director of OHP, Rita Mirabelli, the Project Director for the New Jersey Family Care Housing Supports Program, the portion that lives over here at DCA. Jackie Tracalow, the Project Director of Bringing Veterans Home, Jen Debiak, who's our Programs Team Lead here at OHP, and Shahilda Boynes, who's one of the Program Managers in the Incubator section here at OHP. Right, and now I'm happy to pass it over to Janelle Winter, Assistant Commissioner and Director, so we can have some opening remarks. Janelle?
Thanks, Mike. And I want to thank all of you here for joining us. We have a lot of you here today, and I think that indicates, how important what we're talking about today is and how much so many people care about these issues. And it is a time when we're seeing a lot of rapid change. And that's coming with a lack of clarity a lot of times about what that change means, or if it's actually been implemented, or if it hasn't been implemented, or if it's been implemented and then there's been a court case and now it's not, but oh, it's back. There's just a lot of broad strokes discussion of programs and issues and areas that I think those of us who've worked in this field know actually contain a lot of nuance, a lot of really important nuance. And so it's been creating a lot of confusion and fear, I think, that can prevent us from being able to do the work that we want to do and the work that's so important for us to do. And I think at a time like right now, we have to keep in mind our North Star, which is the people that we're serving, what we know about them, what we know that they need, what's going to work to serve them. And I think that's why we wanted to come together today, as we've heard from a lot of people asking questions, looking for some guidance or some clarity about what is going on at the federal level, what's happening here in New Jersey, what are we all going to do next? So we wanted to come together and first of all, understand what we know and don't know about federal policies and requirements. It's going to be really important for us to understand, out of everything we hear, what's actually in effect right now that we need to follow. What's happening, what's in effect for us right here and now in New Jersey, as opposed to what might be coming down the road, or what could happen, or someone hopes will happen, or what's happening in other areas across the nation. All of those things are important. We've got to be able to plan. We've got to be able to learn from our colleagues and peers across the country. We've got to think about how we'll best continue to serve people who are homeless in the future. But we do need to understand what's a current requirement, a recommendation, what's a potential policy change in the future. We also want to look at our data and our experience here in New Jersey and what it's showing us. Those national trends, that national information is important, but homelessness is solved on the ground. And to do that, we need to know what homelessness looks like here, what causes it, and what solves it right here at home. And happily, we have really good information on that here. And Mike will take you on a deep dive of that information, as I know you all know that he can and loves to. That presentation is going to talk in detail about what that shows us about where we've been and what we've been building over the past few years, and how we can continue that good work in the future. We also do need to think about how to plan for the future together. I'm very proud and also very grateful to everyone on this call and everyone who's engaged in these efforts to end homelessness. Our state and local government, providers, advocates, people with lived experience, for working to create a system that can work to achieve our goals of addressing and ending homelessness. It's not enough. We're not there yet. We can improve and we need to improve, and we need more resources to help us do that. But we built the bones of something that can really help prevent and end homelessness by supporting our field of providers and developers, by engaging in conversation and listening to each other, and by building a community of people who are united and willing to do the next right thing and to do the hard things that need to be done to address the injustice of homelessness. And we're at a really key time to think about the future. You know, since 2024 and ongoing, the COVID resources we have for housing have been extended. You know, out of those COVID resources, New Jersey put more than $2 billion into emergency housing assistance, middle-term housing assistance, eviction and homelessness prevention, and also the creation of new housing. We had one of the strongest and longest eviction moratoria in the country, and we invested in assistance when that moratorium ended so that we could keep people stable, and we did. But now that that funding is gone from our system, we're starting to see returns to homelessness, rising homelessness rates, and rising eviction rates. I think we used that COVID money very smartly. We staved off a lot of the negative effects that many other places saw earlier. And we also embedded best practices that we know work into our systems. And we invested in creating some really new, innovative, and data-driven interventions like diversion, like eviction defense and diversion. We, and by we, I mean all of us, our entire community who are working together on these issues, created a system that can do it. Now we need to protect it, sustain it, and scale it. So as we're talking together today, you know, what I'll be thinking about and what I think we need to do in the future is to follow the data where it takes us, continue to be willing to adapt and change our interventions to meet the needs as they change, to understand that data and to be able to educate our stakeholders and our fellow New Jerseyans about them, about who's homeless in New Jersey, what does homelessness look like here, and what does it take to address it. There are a lot of misconceptions about what it means to be homeless, about who is homeless, and along with that comes misconceptions about what causes it and what can solve it. But I think so many of you here on the call know how those misconceptions are wrong and what it actually means. And I really think that if we can find ways to talk to our community, to our neighbors, to our friends and family about the struggles that people face and that we see them face and how difficult it can be to make a life that's affordable and sustainable for people and their families, and just how people face those struggles and are able to overcome them with so much less help than you'd think it would take to overcome some of these amazing challenges people face. I think if people really understand that, most people would want to join in our work. They would support it. They would want to see people live the lives that they can, and they'd want to support the interventions that help people do that. You know, they in a very compassionate and empathetic way. I really think that if we can get those messages out. And so I think that's one thing I've been thinking about and will continue to think about. Look for your help to think about, how do we let people know? And also, how do we help ourselves and other people, our stakeholders, understand the impacts of what's being proposed at the federal level and what's actually happening right now, and continue that education? And finally, how do we continue to build and foster the community that we've built together? where we can support each other, where we can talk to each other, where we can say hard things to each other sometimes and listen to them and learn from them and support each other as we keep going with the work. I want to thank Thaisa, Kate, and Matt for joining us today to share their perspectives and their expertise and knowledge. I want to thank our DCA team, especially our Office of Homelessness Prevention and Eviction Prevention rock stars, who are right in the midst of this, but really our whole team, because everyone at DCA is focused on what we need to do to end homelessness, to provide affordable housing for everyone who needs it, to help families thrive all over the state. And I want to thank all of you. We're happy that you came to talk with us, meet with us. I hope it's really helpful for you. And if it is, I hope that we can continue to meet, to talk with each other, to look at changes we see, think about how they're hitting us, and think about how we can continue to plan together for the future. We've done a lot of good work by doing that planning together, and I know we can continue it. And I will turn it back to Mike to talk about some of that work and some of those things we're going to do.
Awesome. Thanks, Janelle. So now we're going to move into the next phase of our presentation, right? And so importantly, right, before you hear from our great panel, right, Renee and myself, right, are going to walk through a little bit deep dive into New Jersey homelessness data from all sources and solutions grounded in evidence. Importantly, 2 weeks ago, right, the point in time count numbers were released by Monarch, right? Oh, that's actually 3 weeks ago now. And they precipitated a lot of great conversations, particularly as they were merged with the executive orders, right? And now we hope that in socializing all of this information to you with some additional context, right, those conversations, to Janelle's point earlier, have a deeper richness there. Right. So purpose, right? We've really got three main objectives for today. First, it's to provide a clear and up-to-date snapshot of homelessness in New Jersey based on data that's been reported from various sources through August 10th of this year. Second, right, we're going to review what the evidence, right, both from here and from other jurisdictions, tell us works to reduce and end homelessness. Right. And thirdly, we're going to consider how we, as a statewide network of agencies, advocates, service providers, and policymakers, what we can do and what those tangible steps to go do the hard things that Janelle just alluded to matter, can happen, but also to what that looks like. Right. Importantly, you'll notice that we're not here to debate politics. Right. Our focus is on what's happening in New Jersey and what the numbers and outcomes tell us. Right. Importantly, having a fact-based conversations in today's current political milieu really matters, right? And when we talk about efficiency and working towards the ending of something like homelessness, that has to be front and center. So now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Renee Kubiatis, Senior Policy Advisor here at the division.
Thanks, Mike. So before our speakers today dive into the state level data and potential actions that you can take, I want to acknowledge the broader federal and state policy environment. So first, an executive order does not mean anything until the federal agencies like HUD, who are named in one of them at least, that are tasked with carrying out the executive order actually take action within their programs, grants, and directives. However, as you see on this screen, in late July, the executive order on ending crime and disorder on America's streets signaled a significant shift towards civil commitment for individuals experiencing homelessness with mental illness or substance use or both, increased enforcement of camping bans, and the tying of federal funding to certain public safety criteria. It also explicitly deprioritizes housing first approaches at the federal level. Then on the bottom of the screen, you see in early August, the executive order on improving oversight of federal grant making created stricter requirements for discretionary grants, a stronger link between funding decisions and administrative priorities at the federal level, and the potential for grants to be terminated if they no longer align with those priorities. While these changes may or may not affect specific funding streams in our state, they underscore the importance of having a strong state level understanding of what's effective here so that our strategies are informed by evidence rather than by shifting political winds. That's what my colleagues and our speakers will ensure we all have coming out of this webinar today. Before turning it over to them, I also wanted to touch briefly on the hard-won protections that are in place because of many of you who advocated for them over the last decade or more to protect people who are unhoused or housing insecure. Importantly, we have a very strong law against discrimination in the state, and our policies and priorities ensure a housing-first approach to best meet the needs of people. Just as a reminder, our law against discrimination prohibits discrimination against individuals because of race, creed, color, national origin, ancestry, age, sex, gender identity or expression, affectional or sexual orientation, marital status, familial status, nationality, or liability for service in the armed forces. Also, earlier this year, the Office of the Attorney General issued statements and guidance on the law against discrimination as it relates to immigrants. And our current laws, as I mentioned, protect people who are LGBTQ+. However, with these recent executive orders listed on the slide, again, there's no directive yet from the federal government to change our course. And today we're going to remind ourselves of what is in place in New Jersey that works and how we can be prepared for the future. So let's begin with the data and facts in our state with Michael Callahan.
Thanks, Renee. Right. So importantly, right, just to level set, right, let's start with the scale of the issue, right? And so when we look at all sources, right, on homelessness in New Jersey, right, from January 1st through August 10th of this year, 117,679 distinct individuals have interacted with our homelessness response system. And so that's up about 3.7% from the same period in 2024. Interestingly, and really importantly, right, the number of new admissions dropped slightly, right? And this is from just under 58,900 last year to 56,723, right? And so this means, right, that more of the people in our system are carryovers from prior months or years, and fewer are first-time entrants. That being said, right, our system throughput right now is showing cracks. And speaking to what Janelle alluded to, is that the exhaustion of the COVID resources, right? Our permanent housing exits have fallen by nearly a third compared to that same period last year, right? From 25,737 in 2024 to our correction, right, through the 10th of 2024, right, to 17,445. All housing exits year to date, right, comparatively to last year, right, which include transitional and temporary exits to housing, right, also fell by 30%. And so the picture that's emerging here is that inflow is steadily to slightly down, but outflow has slowed considerably. And what many of you know on this call is that is creating a bottleneck, keeping the overall system census count high and putting more pressure on shelter beds, street outreach teams, and other resources, and more competition for those resources. On the prevention side, right, we've engaged about 93,000 people so far this year, and that's very similar to that number last year. But the share of those individuals that have later entered homelessness has increased sharply, right? So for folks that received prevention services in 2023, about 4,369 of them entered into homelessness in 2024. This is contrast with 7,378 people that received some form of prevention services in 2024 that have now entered into homelessness in 2025. This is a 69% increase. And this tells us two things, right? So first, our prevention programs are reaching people, which is good. Second, though, but that many of these people are facing such severe instability that even with intervention, they still end up without housing. And so when we look at service patterns, we've seen the number of people accessing unsheltered services, meaning that they're living outdoors or in places not meant for human habitation, and a path worker or one of our RS outreach workers, or there was another unsheltered services provider, right? That has risen by more than 22% to over 10,000 individuals, 220 to be in fact, right? If you look on the graph on the table that's on your screen, right? We are about 500 people short, right? And we're short of the entire end of year unsheltered count, right? From across the state, right? And, you don't have to be a statistician to understand where that curve goes as we move into the colder months, right? Shelter services are up slightly while coordinated entry usage is slightly down. So this combination, higher unsheltered counts, stable prevention reach, and future exits, this is suggesting and quantitatively indicating, right, that our system is under immense strain, particularly when it comes to permanent housing availability and access to resources to effectuate those permanent housing outcomes. And so when we talk about system performance, one important measure of is median length of stay, or MLOS, right, for those exiting to housing. For permanent housing, and this is something to be really proud of for a lot of folks on this call that have done the maximum amount of optimization they can with the limited resources they have, right? The median length of stay has dropped from 56 days in 2024 to 46 days this year, right? And so for all housing outcomes combined, it's also dropped from 52 days to 43 days. And so importantly, right, while the numbers that we just talked about were really dire, it's a real success in terms of process efficiency, right? This means that folks are collaborating and working stronger together than they ever have in the past 3 years, that when a unit is available with a mechanism by which to effectuate the housing outcome, right, that we can move someone from homelessness into housing more quickly than before. But on the other side, right, the drop of total number of placements tells us that speed alone isn't enough if we have neither the housing supply nor the housing vehicles to include assistance, right, to help match that increased demand. And so now let's look at why people are entering homelessness in the first place. And so importantly, what gives credence to the PIC count, which was just published, right, is that many of these findings mirror what was presented in that, right? And at a larger scale, right? And so from the cross-sectional aspect of what the PIC count is sensing, right, that is incredibly helpful and insight, and we're getting cross-validation across all these measures, right? So far in 2025, the leading cause of homelessness is being asked to leave a shared residence, accounting for a little bit more than 1 in every 5 people entering into homelessness. So this can happen when someone's staying with friends or family, or when the arrangement becomes untenable, often due to overcrowding, conflict, or if there's some financial strain on that blended household. The second leading cause is eviction at 17.41%. Right. While this is down slightly from last year, it still represents nearly the same 1 in 5 entries into homelessness. The third category is other, right, which is 11.25, which covers a range of circumstances that don't fit neatly into our standardized cause codes. And so when we round out, right, the top 5 causes, right, are job, income loss at 10.62%, or release from prison or jail at 4.8%. The notable trend is that job or income loss is up more than a full percentage point from last year. And this is reflecting broader economic pressures on low-income households. Right. Another is at the unknown category, so where either providers are not capturing these data points, they're not uploading correctly, or they're being captured in a place that we don't have visibility, right, is that has more than doubled since 2023, from just over 2% to more than 4% of entries. And so while there's numerous efforts across many of the continuums and our provider networks, right, to increase the richness and the quality of data we're collecting, an important key in all the work you're doing is that question, that first one, right? Why are you here? Right? What is, when someone is presenting to you, right? Whether that's across the street, whether that's across a desk, whether that's on a phone, right? Is understanding that capturing that reason lets us go and have saturation around what the real causes are. And so taken together, all of these causes suggest that housing instability in New Jersey is primarily driven, right, by structural and economic factors. Let me foot stomp that. Housing instability and homelessness in New Jersey is primarily driven by nearly 6.5 or 7 people out of 10 entering into homelessness by structural and economic factors and not individual pathologies. And now let's talk about outcomes for people placed into housing. Right. In 2023, a little bit more than 25,000 individuals were placed into permanent housing across the state through various Housing First programs or programs that leverage a Housing First methodology or are contractually required to do so. By the end of the first year, right, only 950 of them had returned to homelessness, which is a 3.7% return rate, which is incredibly impressive. Over 2 years, that return number rises to 1,000, right, or 4%. Right. This means that the methodologies and when you mix in additional rental assistance and a surge capacity to help providers meet the need, right, we can achieve fantastic outcomes. Importantly, when we look at 2024, right, you see the COVID money starting to go away, the eviction moratorium is lifted, and what that inflow looks like, right? The scale of Housing First placements, right, we housed more people as a state in 2024 than we ever have in the history of New Jersey. But importantly, what we've seen, right, is that so far this year, almost 5,000 people have returned to homelessness, which is a 15.31% return rate, right? While higher than that previous year's rate, it still means that the vast majority of people, over 84%, remain stably housed after 1 year. And something I want to say right now is when we talk about retention rate, right? Just so you know, the retention rate of most four-year universities for their first-year students returning is only on average in a four-year university across the United States is 78%. So what that means is, right, well, even though it's an apple to oranges comparison, is that ostensibly the way we're doing Housing First in New Jersey is more efficacious for retention than what the entire nation's university system is. It's also important to note that larger scale operations can also produce higher return rates. When we look at the literature and outcomes across the rest of the nation, and that's simply a function of because you're serving more people with higher barriers to stability, which increases the risk pool. And so when we look at why people return to homelessness after they're being placed, the causes also align closely with the reasons for the initial episode of homelessness. Again, what's always rearing its head, particularly for some of our most vulnerable folks, is the top cause is eviction, particularly at 25.5%, followed by being asked to leave a shared residence, which is most deeply felt, right, by African American family households, and also too, right, there's also job income or income loss to thirdly for 1 out of every 10 people that are re-entering in homelessness. Right. And so the takeaway here is that returns are not about the person failing to comply. There is no something that is fundamentally wrong with that individual because they had experienced homelessness once. Again, their homelessness and return to homelessness is again precipitated by economic and housing stability challenges, which persist even after that housing is secured. And importantly, and Renee and I are going to foot stomp a couple things here, right? From this analysis, 3 points really stand out. First, it is a fact. Housing First placements are effective in the state of New Jersey. The majority of people that are placed in a Housing First program stay housed over the long term. Second, the drivers of returns are the same as the initial drivers of homelessness, meaning that our prevention and stabilization strategies need to address the same root causes at both ends. And thirdly, that economic and housing instability are such strong predictors of return. And when that categorizing folks either formerly homeless or currently and saying that there's a higher likelihood of behavioral health issue or substance use issue, and that is what is precipitating the return, is patently false. Right? This underscores the importance not only of pairing housing with supports that address financial and tenancy stability, but also too that are ensuring the entirety of a household is supported longer than just when a rapid rehousing case management contract ends. And so the evidence here, right, in particular, right, it talks clearly to several strategies. So first, Housing First, rapidly placing people into permanent housing without preconditions, reduces the time people spend homeless and it increases their stability. This approach has been replicated across the country with such strong results. NEH and a bunch of the other national level organizations are continually putting out fact-based papers on this, right? And similarly, our data in New Jersey reinforces that. And one of the other things with the ask is now that we have a deeper understanding, right, of the rising tide of unsheltered homelessness, this means that all of you in your community should be having structured conversations on aligning your programs and any dry powder you have sitting on the sidelines, whether that's home funds that could be repurposed into home TBRA, with the CDBG CV3 or CV2 funds that could be allocated, or whether you have local dollars, right? If you have a mechanism by which to effectuate housing exits for people that are unsheltered, now is the time to execute, not plan for 3 months, not plan for 6 months, but to engage in a substantive, aggressive 1 or 2 week strategy and tactical execution session. And also here, Renee is going to talk a little bit about the Case Management Institute and some of the professionalization that's going to solidify that.
Sure, and it don't have to be long here, but we are, almost halfway through a 2-year project to develop this Case Management Institute, developing the standards, competencies, and training, including intro, certificate level, and elective courses to make sure that our housing services and supports ecosystem staff have what they need to meet the needs of all the households they're serving, and to perform best in this space with all the information and tools that we have that are working. So that's all I'll share for now. But folks can follow up with me. if they have any
Oh,
questions.
definitely. And Renee will drop her email in the chat for, even though I think the majority of people on this call have it. Right. And so also too, one of the things that we want to also talk about is that eviction prevention and diversion works, whether that's legal defense, mediation, or targeted rental assistance. And it directly addresses one of the top drivers of homelessness in our state. These interventions are cost effective and they have such a high ROI, particularly when they're targeted to households at risk, right? In Dean Shop, you have at the Office of Eviction Prevention, right? You have CEDD, which is averaging around a $2,600 intervention cost. Our diversion program in OHP is averaging right now, year to date, a $348 diversion cost, right? Importantly, there are many county and local funded programs, right? But when you're talking with your philanthropic partners, right, it would be very helpful if individuals are engaging around these principles and what the best ROI for unrestricted funds could be, right? And so third, right, we're really looking at integrated voluntary supports, right? So look as mental health care, substance use treatment, employment assistance, and tenancy skills, in particular to significantly improve our housing retention rates for folks with complex needs, right? You know, many of you are nascent providers in the New Jersey Family Care Housing Supports Program. If you are interested in becoming one and we're not in a grant cycle or we're not looped in at all, right, please reach out to Rita Maribelli from our team. She will put her email in the chat, right, and we will get you connected. Similarly, right, one of the things that we want to talk about and be very clear about, if any municipality or county in the state of New Jersey is actively moving towards criminalization, please let us know. Right? We need to know as rapidly as possible so that we can engage and respond. And we talk about data-driven targeting, right? Now we're moving into a space where we need to engage and leverage predictive analytics to identify households that are most likely to return or enter into homelessness. We need to continue to be efficient, but also to make sure that we are not losing the thread as we traverse through this forest. Right. And so as we look through and we transition into some of our guests, right? In closing, the data from New Jersey tells a clear story. Rapid housing placement works. Prevention is cost effective and stability depends on ongoing supports that are tailored to the needs of each household. Our next steps should be to expand housing first capacity across the state, scale eviction prevention efforts, integrate post-placement stabilization into every housing program, and to strengthen statewide data coordination to guide those efforts. When we stay focused on these priorities, we can make measurable progress in reducing homelessness in New Jersey, and regardless of changes to the federal policy environment, to ensure that more of our residents and our neighbors, our community members, our friends have a safe and stable place to call home. And with that, I'm happy to pass it over to Thaisa Kelly, Chief Executive Officer of Monarch Housing.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to the DCA team for all of that information and for putting this together. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we prepare, and I want to reiterate things that were said by both Janelle or all of the folks at DCA, Janelle, Renee, and Mike. We have been seeing a lot of things come out at the federal level. However, those have been executive orders and memos. Those things are not the law until we have federal agencies like HUD actually putting forward regulations that detail how our local programs and our local communities are supposed to, adhere to those orders that have been put out there. So in the absence of any regulation from HUD, communities need to continue doing the work that helps to actually address and end homelessness. And we need to kind of stay steadfast. That being said, we do need to be considering the things that are coming out and what we're hearing and preparing and understanding what impact they will have. But until there is a regulation in writing, in paper, letters, regulations that are going towards agencies, going towards continuums and communities, outlining a change in how we must do our work, we should continue the work that we're doing. Next slide. So I'm going to just highlight a couple of things that we are watching and things that we've been hearing. I don't want to spend too much time because, again, we have executive orders, we have memos, we have different actions that are happening at the federal level. They signal the direction things are potentially going in, but until we have clear regulations, we don't have anything concrete to go on to say how we need to think about our work or potentially adjusting our work. But we can take a look at what's happening and recognize that this might impact our work and prepare for or think about the ways that it will impact our work. So a couple of things that we're watching are the policy changes that are being discussed in these executive orders and in the memos, the funding threats that are out there looking at specifically the budget and how programs are funded, and then the changes in staffing and how that impacts the work that needs to happen. I think at the top of this, a couple of executive orders were highlighted. I want to just highlight an additional order that we can send out the information about this a little bit later. But we have, the executive order that was detailing or entitled Ending Crime and Disorder in American Streets that was released on July 24th that specifically talked about ways of addressing unsheltered homelessness that include more punitive approaches and moving away from things that we know work, like housing first and harm reduction. We also had an executive order signed on August 7th that talked about improving oversight of federal grant making that really speaks to having more closely administration aligned oversight of federal grant making. And then we also had a memo from the Department of Justice providing guidance for recipients of federal funds regarding unlawful discrimination. And this was a memo that was sent to the federal agencies. So again, this memo does not carry the weight of the law in terms of changes to programs until federal agencies actually adjust the regulations. But it was a memo to federal agencies indicating how the Department of Justice is interpreting the Civil Rights Act and what it considers constitutions of violations to that act. All of those things together are really kind of pointed towards a federal approach that looks at, changing or restructuring kind of the way that we are looking at the work that we're doing around ending homelessness and the work that has been done in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, serving the LGBTQ plus identifying community, serving folks who are undocumented, how we are engaging with and approaching criminalization of homelessness. All of these things really speak to moving away from harm reduction and moving away from housing first. These are all really challenging things. And I recognize that for many of you on this call, for all of us on this call, there's a lot of uncertainty because in the absence of regulations, we don't know what these things specifically mean for our day-to-day activities and how we do our work. But because we don't have any specific regulation, what we can safely assume and move forward with is that we can continue to do work in the ways that we know help to end homelessness and continue to do our work in the way that we have been doing it until we see something telling us that we have to do something otherwise. The other thing that we're closely watching and encourage everybody else to be continuing to watch is what happens with the federal budget. We already saw the release of the administration's proposed budget, the skinny budget, which had a lot of things in there that talked about reducing and restructuring the way that our housing and homeless programs are funded at the federal level. And then we also had subsequent budgets released by the House and by the Senate, which had a slightly different approach and perspective in terms of funding. And so we saw that, from those two budgets, there is a little bit of a pulling back from a complete restructuring of our systems and, a move towards keeping or maintaining funding, slight increases in funding in our homeless programs and our housing programs. But we did see within the House budget a call for elimination of home funding, whereas the Senate budget call for that to remain intact. All of that to say that we have to be watching the budget conversation at the federal level very closely because that impacts what resources will be available to our programs that are providing housing assistance, rental assistance, and homeless services to individuals in our communities. And we need to be advocating for the maximum amount of funding in all of these programs because we know the importance of these programs. But that is another piece that we're watching. And then the final place that we're really looking at all of this is staffing changes. We've already started to see reductions of HUD staff at our local offices, but also the most recently signed executive order points to the potential that there are going to be special appointees at the federal agencies that will be overseeing grant making for those agencies. So for example, HUD will have an appointee that is overseeing the discretionary grant making of the agency. That is something that we need to be looking out for because as we've seen, some of the approaches that are being pushed are not the approaches that we know work well. So we need to be, conscious of and cognizant of these changes that are happening at the federal level. Next slide. So, what does this mean? There is a lot that is coming out, and it is hard sometimes to stay on top of all of this. I would really, really encourage each and every one of you to sign up for the National Alliance to End Homelessness website for their newsletter and information about what's going on. It asks you to sign up for the National Low Income Housing Coalition. There are many different national organizations that are watching the things that are unfolding at the federal level and providing a good summary and synthesis of what's going on. But what can you do right now in the wake of all of this uncertainty? What can you do as an agency, as a continuum of care, planning body, as a program? What can you do in the wake of all this uncertainty? The first thing I would really suggest is one, getting a summary of all of the changes from one of those national partners, or all of the directions and indications from some of those national partners, and start to evaluate your programs against that. This is by no means asking you to change anything about your program. We do not want to change anything about our programs because we know what works. But what we do need to do is prepare for what might come or be aware of how those changes could impact our programs. So it does mean that we do need to take some time to evaluate what those potential changes might mean for our programs. We need to understand, what does it mean to have an interpretation of the Civil Rights Act that says that we cannot have specialized groups? What does that mean for the work that we're doing with engaging people with lived experience of homelessness? What does it mean to look at a move away from harm reduction and how that impacts the work that you do and how your agency provides service? What does that mean for the federal government to move away from housing first, and how does that impact the way that your agency provides services? There are a lot of different places where these executive orders and these memos will impact our communities, our agencies, our programs. We just need to be aware of it right now. We are not suggesting, and we ask that people do not change anything, but just be aware of what those changes are going to do to your programs and what pieces are going to be touched by these orders and memos. Second thing that we're really strongly encouraging every agency, every continuum to think about and to do is to secure legal counsel. We don't know what the future is going to look like, what specifically is going to come forward from this, from the administration in terms of the next steps in this process. But we need to be prepared and we need to be armed. And so one way to do that for many providers is to secure legal counsel. And I think, so conversations that can happen at your COC tables, conversations that can happen amongst providers and partners, is to think about, how do we coordinate and collaborate together so that there is a collective support for legal counsel on some of these issues as we start to see program regulations and as we start to fully understand how they might impact our programs. The third thing we're really asking communities, COCs, agencies to do is, you just heard from Mike all of the data about what we're seeing in New Jersey, and we know what works. We know that housing first works. We know that engaging folks and helping to stabilize them and then wrapping services around them is an approach and a process that works. We know that coordinated entry and helping to prioritize and get people connected to housing and having a systemic process for getting people connected from their experience of housing instability to permanent housing works. And so as a COC, it is really important for our communities to be having conversations about, what are the values that you hold dear in this work? What are the approaches that work? What are the things that will help move your community forward in addressing homelessness and ensuring that you are all on the same page and ensuring that you are kind of confirming and recertifying your commitment to those values and those goals. And this can come through in your policies that you are creating as a COC. This can come through in the approaches that you're supporting. But it is really important for the COC as a planning body to look at what is your ultimate goal. And I assume that all of us are coming to this table with the same goal of ending homelessness. And that means homelessness wherever it shows up, whether it is on the street, in the shelters, in hospitals, wherever people are experiencing housing security, figuring out a way to end that homelessness. And so looking at the whole system, what are the values that you have, and establishing what your shared goals are so that you're prepared to talk about how you address or adjust to or work within a new reality that might have different approaches to addressing homelessness. And then finally, the thing that we're really, really encouraging all communities to do, all agencies, all programs, is stay the course. Again, we know Housing First works. We know rapid rehousing works. We know trauma-informed engagement works. And that means that we cannot be using punitive approaches to addressing homelessness. We have to continue to do the things that we know work to end homelessness and continue to do those things until we are told specifically and very clearly from federal partners that we're not allowed to use our funding to do that. At the end of the day, as a community, we are all collectively responsible for addressing homelessness and serving the people who are experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity. And the way that we do that most effectively and best is by staying the course and doing the things and implementing the programs that we know work. So we are strongly encouraging folks not to preemptively change the way that you're doing anything in your projects, anything in your communities. Be aware of what impacts these changes might have or what impacts these orders might have. But not to change anything about the way that you are doing your work until you are specifically and in writing told by the Department of HUD, Housing and Urban Development. So stay the course. There will be continued conversations. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for continuing to kind of dig into this. And at Monarch and our team will be talking more about like what are the specific things that COCs should be digging into. For example, your policies, the structure of your Housing First programs, the structure of your prioritization and monitoring, all of those things that we need to be looking at. And of course, we need to continue to be improving our programs because while we have Housing First that works, there's always room for improvement. There's always ways to ensure that we have better outcomes. And so we need to continue doing the things that work well and continuing to improve our system. And let's make sure that we're not preemptively stopping the things that work and that we continue to stay the course. I believe that is all that I have for now. I am happy to pass it off to our next presenter, but again, really encourage all of our agencies to continue doing what you're doing.
Oh, Kate, I think.
There we go. Sorry. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you. Thank you very much to our good friends and partners at DCA, Janelle, Mike, and Renee, for your leadership and for bringing this meeting together. I'm here today representing the Supportive Housing Association of New Jersey and our over 120 member organizations. We all work as an organization to support the creation of permanent, affordable housing with flexible support services for people with disabilities and other special needs. In New Jersey, and Taisha mentioned this as well, and our other presenters, we are very fortunate to have a service provider community dedicated to employing best practices in the interest of giving the best possible care for the people they serve, and this is very important to SHA. Our members are deeply committed to safely and responsibly serving the needs of people experiencing homelessness and with disabilities. I saw at last count over 15 of our member organizations are on this call, and it's great to have them here with us today. The first thing I wanted to talk about is our opposition and concern to the executive order titled Ending Crime and Disorder on America's Street that Taisha mentioned. We are, concerned about this, but, echoing what Taisha said, until there are more concrete instructions, just encourage everyone, including our members, to continue to do this work. SHA is very dedicated to individuals being able to live independently, so the language in the executive order that directs institutionalization, criminalization, and forced treatment over proven community-based approaches is very concerning to us. We believe that individuals, no matter their disability or barrier, have civil rights and those shouldn't be violated. And we're, concerned about the well-being of some of our most vulnerable people in society. Individuals, as you all know, in need of supportive housing may live with one or more challenges such as mental health, physical, intellectual, developmental disabilities, recovery, aging, or they might be experiencing or exiting homelessness. And they may also belong to the LGBTQ community or be impacted by threats to DEI, because oftentimes we don't all only fall into one category. We know, SHA knows, and you all know, that more people than ever are living in communities of their choice and receiving the services they need to lead full and independent lives to the best of their abilities. And we know supportive housing is a proven strategy that works. We've seen in New Jersey a dedicated investment to capital funding, rental assistance, and service funding, and we really want to see the emphasis continue to be community-based solutions. We know there are far too many people living in temporary housing or struggling to find a place that they can afford, and Mike shared data that certainly emphasize that. Just wrapping up what our concerns about the executive order, it really runs contrary to the Americans with Disability Act and the Supreme Court's Olmstead decision. That decision guaranteed that people with disabilities have the right to live in community with necessary support. And although no specific instructions are out, we are concerned, if it would lead to involuntary institutionalization, that would deprive people of people experiencing homelessness due to mental illness, substance use, or other reasons of their civil rights. I do want to point out that nationally there is a growing trend with an increase in the number of individuals living with co-occurring mental illness and developmental disabilities. According to the National Disability Rights Network, up to 40% of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities such as Down syndrome, autism, cerebral palsy, and others also have a co-occurring mental health conditions. And these, all of these populations are ones that SHA's members that are service providers serve. We know that homelessness does not impact all groups in the same way, and people with disabilities have greater vulnerabilities when they experience homelessness, coupled with recent cuts to Medicaid, which can fund services in supportive housing. We find this especially concerning. People with disabilities often experience long-term and recurring homelessness. It is estimated by New Jersey Department of Human Services that about 350,000 New Jerseyans would lose their health coverage under the new federal budget law, and this loss would hit people with disabilities especially hard. The cuts could have a devastating effect on the 1.85 million New Jerseyans who are Medicaid members and also have an impact on our economy. We really applaud what the state has done with advancing Medicaid through the 1115 waiver, and this has been an innovative way for providers to begin to fund housing supports through Medicaid. We're also concerned that the executive order mentions enforcing vagrancy laws, urban camping bans, encampment removals, and law enforcement sharing health data. But again, until there are more specific instructions, we know that our members are carrying on as they have been doing. We are grateful, the state of New Jersey has really funded services. On the services side, they've supported individuals with disabilities. This was evident in the recently passed state budget, and we want to continue to see service funding at the federal and state level be available to support that part of supportive housing. we want to make sure, I mentioned specifically people with mental health needs, those experiencing homelessness, people with substance use, are able to continue to self-determine where they want to live and live independently. And we know things such as housing first and harm reduction and community-based treatment are the answer, and not segregation into institutions. Affordable housing remains out of reach for many New Jerseyans, and we are very concerned that funding at the state level, or that federal funding could be diverted, and also funding at the state level. We saw recently in New Jersey, in the National Low-Income Housing Coalition's Out of Reach report, just how unaffordable housing is in New Jersey, and so we know how important it is that we continue to be able to develop the supportive housing pipeline and the affordable housing pipeline so that everyone can have a home that they can afford. Supportive housing really relies on robust investments to capital funding, operating support in the form of rental assistance, and service dollars that are needed to allow people with special needs who are currently waiting for housing to find a home. I want to touch briefly on how important to SHA and our members the Special Needs Housing Trust Fund is. We were very grateful that $20 million has been dedicated to the Special Needs Housing Trust Fund this year. And it's very important to us that the funding at the state level, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, is not diverted, so that this funding can continue next year and in future years. The Special Needs Housing Trust Fund subsidy creates thousands of new units of supportive housing for individuals with disabilities and barriers. In fact, between 2022 and 2024, we saw almost 1,500 opportunities created, which was a 130% increase in production. And our members and other organizations are creating supportive housing really throughout the state and providing that independence. Thinking about threats to the federal budget, it's very important to us that current funding levels for the Housing Choice Voucher Program are maintained. We know that in the House, the proposed House bill in New Jersey, there would be a slightly larger reduction than what is, we know that a slightly larger reduction to the number of households served and households impacted by lost vouchers. The Senate numbers are slightly better, but we really, given the housing crisis in New Jersey and how housing vouchers are often used for the operating dollars in supportive housing, we really can't afford any cut. And so about the federal funding, we were very concerned about the potential elimination of home in the House budget. There are a number of supportive housing projects in New Jersey that successfully have used home dollars to create affordable housing for people with low incomes. I have examples of projects from all across the state. It's a critical source, home is, for gap financing for the low-income housing tax credit. As much as 15 to 20% of all housing tax credit units rely on home for gap funding. So that's very important to us. Home should be funded at the Senate's proposed level as the spending negotiations continue. The National Housing Trust Fund was recently highlighted by the National Low-Income Housing Coalition as an essential source of gap funding used along with home investments in the development of affordable housing. And again, we have examples of projects that our members and others have developed all over the country, all over the state and around the country. And we want to continue to see that the federal funding, the home funding to flow to continue to help to fill those gaps in developing affordable and supportive housing in the state. We are very fortunate, as Taisha mentioned, in the state to have trusted national partners that are sharing up-to-the-date information on what we can all do as far as advocacy and policy-wise. SHA, if you don't already receive our weekly newsletter, we try to compile what we think is most important to those concerned about supportive housing and ending homelessness. We try to share where there is opportunities to advocate, where there are letters that your organization can sign on to, where there are timely resources such as webinars you can watch. We really want to be a source of information from all of you and to support you in the work that you're doing, serving the very vulnerable people with disabilities and special needs who are in need of supported housing and community-based services, housing first, harm reduction, all that have been mentioned already in this call. Our ultimate goal is ending homelessness and ensuring that individuals with disability barriers all have somewhere to live independently, to call home. I do want to mention that I know DCA has been doing some really great work given the uncertainty at the federal level on the need to explore the impact of a variety of interventions that can mitigate potential economic shocks and educate stakeholders on potential risks and effects. And we know this will be very helpful to our partners and members as we continue forward in these times of instability, to be able to predict what may happen at the federal, state, and municipal level. So I want to, certainly thank DCA for their work around that. And just close by, again, encouraging people, if they don't already sign up for our newsletter, we're trying to share information in a very timely manner. And just thank you all for the work you are doing, to those who are SHA members and those who are not. We know you all are doing work to ensure that individuals with disabilities and barriers experiencing homelessness continue to have opportunities to live independently and live in the community and have permanent housing. So thank you very much. I'm going to close
Awesome.
there.
Thanks. Awesome. Thanks so much, Kate. So importantly, right, next up, right, is Matt Hirsch. Matt's the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy here. Well, not here at DCA, but at the Housing and Community Development Network of New Jersey, right? And so now happy to pass it over to Matt.
Thank you, Mike. And here in Trenton, yes, absolutely. There's a lot of great work happening here. And I just did want to start just giving my praise and thanks to my wonderful colleagues on this call, as well as the team at the Department of Community Affairs, who are doing just incredible work in an incredibly difficult time, and not the first time. I mean, we look back a few years at COVID and just everything that you've, been a real partner in helping the community development sector, the community development world, and communities all across New Jersey, helping to navigate a really challenging time. So, just wanted to thank you for that, and then I'll move on, because it really does take a village. So it was really great to hear from everybody. We're going to focus a little bit on this year's state budget, and specifically affordable housing production. The network's one of the network's flagship advocacy priorities is the preservation and growth of the New Jersey Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And just to back up a little bit, I just wanted to just mention that the network works to enhance the ability of its members. We're a statewide membership organization to create and preserve long-term affordable housing and build strong communities throughout New Jersey. So we promote and support and advocate for legislation and programs that involve support services, capacity building and resource development, and obviously public policy, which we're going to get into. Mike, I don't know if I don't know if there's a next slide, but I can just read through the. Here we go. We'll go through very quickly because this was already teed up. But Thaisa and Kate mentioned the National Low Income Housing Coalition's annual assessment, national assessment of state affordability, housing wages, and housing needs. This is in the their annual gap report. It outlines the supply of affordable and available rental home increases. So obviously, if you look just at the landscape across the country, we have a severe shortage of extremely low income housing. Next slide, please. And this is just another extremely low income renters are far more than likely than any others to experience severe housing cost burdens. So not only are we looking at supply shortage and increase and subsequent increasing market value in rental housing and single family and home ownership, but also the cost burdens surrounding other other areas, housing adjacent and otherwise. Next slide, please, Mike. So what does this mean? So we can jump forward just for the sake of time. I did just want to give a little bit of background on this on the gap report. But what does this mean for New Jersey? So obviously it translates to New Jersey directly. And we know that New Jersey has affordability challenges. Specifically, we are about over 200,000 units short just on what the market dictates when it comes to when it comes to the availability of extremely low income households, homes for extremely low income households. So we have a lot of catching up to do. And one of the things that we have been kind of reflecting on and ruminating is the fact that the state, while it has under this administration has course corrected its investment in affordable housing and community development resources, we are nevertheless still saddled with a significant gap period that was created when New Jersey's Council on Affordable Housing was declared moribund, and thereby left a very long limbo period of how towns are supposed to meet their obligations, if they have an obligation, and what they're supposed to do. So when the third round was finally instated, that included a gap period, and now that we're in the fourth round, and with increasing housing costs and limited affordable housing supply, we find our demand much greater, despite this current reinvestment in affordable housing. Next slide, please, Mike. So we are, it's a dubious distinction, but we are number 7 when it comes to housing wage. Our housing wage here is just a tick under $40 an hour, and that is what you would have to earn at full time to earn an average 2-bedroom apartment, which in New Jersey is about $2,079. So you would have to either so $40 an hour full time, or 2.5 minimum wage jobs at $15.49 an hour in order to comfortably afford the same apartment. So obviously, not only is supply an issue, but housing costs are increasing and not commensurate with wages. Next slide, please. All right. So what can we do? Well, what we saw in this past budget and in the FY26 budget that was just passed was nearly a wholesale diversion of the state's primary affordable housing subsidy, builder subsidy, which is the New Jersey Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This fund is responsibly set aside throughout the year through a small percentage of the realty transfer fee, and then it is placed in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, where grant applications come in and are assessed. And this fund is used for the production of under 80% AMI housing. And it is typically smaller scale developments. So we're not looking at the larger, 1,000-unit inclusionary type developments, but we're looking at smaller 100% affordable developments, 5 to 25 home projects. So really supporting efforts that fit into a community's existing infrastructure, existing grid, often using vacant and abandoned properties and restoring those, stacking with stacking finance, so with capital stack that includes the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for things like pre-development, for things like acquisition costs, and for things like increasing materials costs. So what we determined was that early on in this budget process this year, New Jersey has what's called a mansion tax. But this was done at a time when New Jersey had fewer $1 million homes. Now, obviously, you're hard pressed to find a new single-family home, a new construction single-family home in New Jersey anywhere for under $500,000. So we are seeing not only more $1 million homes, but we're seeing more $2 million homes, and we're seeing more $3 million homes. So the state rightfully took action to reassess what's called its mansion tax in this budget, and created a new fee structure that is more progressive and places this tax on homes up to $3 million. That is a revenue raiser that we are always looking for, and we were happy that the state adopted it. However, the state did not adopt it as advocated. The idea of placing additional fees on the sale of very expensive homes is to provide more subsidy and more grants for the construction of low-income homes, which the state is in desperate need for. So there is legislation that you see in front of you that is sponsored by Senator Benji Wimberly, Assemblywoman Berlina Reynolds-Jackson, Yvonne Lopez, and Carol Murphy. And this would dedicate half of new revenue collected from the mansion tax expansion to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And why? Well, just last August, the administration put out a press release that touted the distribution of $109 million from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So not only is there high demand, but there's a considerable pipeline of applications that are ready to go, and that the diversion of these funds really puts those plans at risk. Next slide, Mike. And they're at risk because currently the application portal is closed because of the pipeline and because of uncertainty in funding. So our chief advocacy goal, this not only this or earlier this budget cycle, but into lame duck, is to restore all or a portion of these funds in order to get some of these pipeline projects out the door. And then for the long term, and Janelle, something that you said really resonated with me: protect it, sustain it, and scale it. It's the only way. And I say that in the most endearing technocratic spirit, because it is the only way to develop lasting policy that is going to have a long-term impact. No budget cycle can exist in a vacuum on its own. No sector can, and the community development sector is no exception. It cannot sustain and provide affordable homes for the long term if funding is going to be uncertain year to year. Many of these organizations are small. Many of these organizations have scaled up in order to do housing production, which is obviously a considerable investment in staffing, and requires a considerable amount of technical expertise. So when the state makes this commitment, we have to protect it, sustain it, and scale it. Thank you for that, Janelle. I may actually use that moving forward. Next slide, please. So the network is working statewide to have legislative meetings to impress upon legislators on the importance of restoring this trust fund. Fortunately, your representative probably understands the absolute importance of this trust fund, because at the local level, this is where the smaller community development corporations and smaller builders who are part of the community serve the community in many ways outside of housing, but other social supports. Maybe they're shelter providers, maybe they have a daycare center, maybe they provide workforce development training. They have relationships with mayors and council. They understand the dynamics and needs of the community, and really know the pressure points too, because as all of you know, this is sometimes difficult to navigate at the local level. So it's important that we leverage these relationships that we have in order to emphasize the importance of these funds and how well they work on the ground. Next slide, please, Mike. We can see it. So just a little bit about we are an advocacy organization, so I'd be remiss to not to get into this a little bit. But again, we are working with members. Many of you on this call are members of the network. We're having meetings with Budget Committee members and Assembly Housing Committee and Senate Community and Urban Affairs members, where a lot of most of the housing legislation goes through. Next slide, please, Mike. And I did just want to make a nod to the federal funding. So we, you know what, let me, I apologize here. You know what, Mike, can we go back to this slide and move forward? There we go. So thank you for that. That one was a little out of order. So, and again, none of these policies exist in a vacuum. And I think what we heard today on the call really, really emphasizes that we need to couple all of these with housing first models, legal counsel, removing credit scores, as the only assessment for a rental application, and price fixing and related software in the rental housing market. And most important, streamlining affordable housing and assistance applications to make it easier for one to be their own advocate. We also need to look at what's happening at the federal level, which Kate and Thaisa got into. I'm not going to go through all of this note by note, but we work very closely with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, not only on implementing their research, but also at federal level advocacy. So we do have our congressional delegation in New Jersey is actively aware of these priorities, and so the network and its members are urging these reinvestments to expand affordable housing and homelessness resources, particularly at a time where we really can't lose any of these dollars, and particularly relatively small pots of money when you look at the grand scheme of things. Same goes with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Really a relatively small pot of money when it comes to the $59 billion state budget. We're looking at about $120 million. And when you think of the impact that $120 million can make on communities, that investment, the ROI on that investment is unimaginable. So next slide, please, Mike. I know we're nearing time. So in the we are sorry, I think I need to go back one. The lame duck. There it is. Oh, no. Lame duck 2025 priorities. The next one. Yes, there it is. Thank you. So I mentioned a few of these, but in addition to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund advocacy, we really do have to look at the ecosystem, the policy ecosystem that complements one another. And I really appreciate these calls because DCA takes that kind of global, holistic view of what is working in the housing field and the policy changes that need to be made in order to in order to streamline these programs. So at the network, we we have a considerable homelessness advocacy apparatus through our members who are shelter providers. Code Red is top of the list, is making sure that at the very least, on extreme hot days when air quality is low, days like today, that people guaranteed will have a cool and safe place to be during extreme heat. It really is the least that the state can do, and there is legislation that is moving forward that we hope to achieve during Lame Duck. A homelessness bill of rights. We didn't get into it too much today, but as homelessness numbers continue to rise, we're seeing the criminalization and jailing of folks who are sleeping outside. And this is a knee-jerk reaction that we're seeing across the country, including in New Jersey, when municipalities simply do not know how to deal with homelessness. And we see it often in well-intended communities where there is a strong shelter provider infrastructure, where there's a strong housing resource infrastructure. And nevertheless, when folks start sleeping outside or encampments start popping up, the only thing that folks really know how to do is to react instead of cultivate, engage, and understand which resources are available and how they need to be applied. So anytime we hear of a town considering criminalization tactics to address the choice of to address a policy choice of homelessness, frankly, we direct them to Mike and his team at DCA, and everybody should do that because they can really walk you through the resources and make it clear that criminalization is never an option. So this homelessness bill of rights would prohibit that practice. And that's in line with a national movement that is going on now under the title of the Gloria Johnson Act. Eviction filing fees, and this is obviously very important to DCA, increasing the eviction filing fee not only as a deterrent for eviction, but as a way to bring landlords and tenants to the table, and also as a way to bolster DCA's homelessness prevention programs. Policy Lab and any affordable housing advocate that you can find across the country will advocate that higher eviction filing fees result in fewer evictions, more homelessness prevention resources, and more often than not, allow space for a tenant and a landlord to mediate and come to terms on some type of agreement. New Jersey, I should note, is among the cheapest places. We're expensive in a lot of ways, but we are very cheap to evict, $50 a pop. And during these hearings, we did hear about the differences between nonprofit landlords and corporate landlords, and I think that's really important. I think it's also important to note that when we're thinking of smaller landlords and the impact that these fees might have, unless these smaller landlords are evicting an unimaginable amount of people, this is not going to have an impact on most landlords across the state. Yes, the eviction, the cost of filing to evict will be more in line with surrounding states, but unless filing evictions is part of your business model, which can be the case, then it's not going to affect anybody's bottom line. And so this is not only programmatically important, but from a policy standpoint, increasing eviction filing fees and offsetting and using any new revenue to help bolster the state's homelessness prevention programs makes sense. Rental property application fees. Again, many larger landlords have business models that are predicated on this, on this practice where they're able to collect property application fees just in perpetuity. And so we want to put guardrails on that. Accessory dwelling units, obviously upzoning is incredibly important, and accessory dwelling units are listed in the state's new fair housing law. So it's important that the state provide statewide guidance on how municipalities can move forward with this important housing type. And then defining unconscionable rent increases. This is all part of this policy ecosystem. But at the very least, the state needs to determine a maximum threshold at which there's a universal recognition of unconscionability. Next slide, please, Mike. And so our timing is quick for these bills. We have September to October is really when we are gearing up and meeting with legislators when we can. November is when the when the legislature reconvenes, and it runs into January. And then in January, we're going to have a new legislature and a new governor. And if these bills don't pass by then, they have to restart the process, of course. But we'll also have a new landscape for anybody on this call to re-engage with legislators, to really educate them about the work that we do and why these resources are so important. Thanks so much, Mike. That's it for now.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Matt. So importantly, right, here's the link if you want to scan in the QR code, right? We are distributing the slides and what that looks like. So don't worry, you will have all the materials, particularly of note, right, are the upcoming AT meetings, right, which are very key to getting more deeply involved with the network and its efforts, right? So now, right, in the interest of, we still have about 600 of folks on this call, right? We're actually going to move to, right, one of the things that we like to put front and center of everything here at the department, right? And so now I'm happy to introduce Raquel Cooper, right? Raquel is leading our Department of Community Affairs Advisory Board, right? And importantly, Raquel, right, I was just wondering if you have any thoughts and can process a little bit about not only what you've heard thus far, right? And then also too, if you can maybe just offer us, right, anything that really stood out to you or anything really that when the constituencies that you work with, right, that you want to represent. So Raquel?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I do want to say all of it makes so much sense, and thank you all for all the clarifying information and data. And I think really the word on the streets with everybody who is on an advisory board, which there are 16 of them right now currently, like all throughout the state. So, and part of it is like half, those who have previous experience being homelessness, like exited out of homelessness. And then the other half is really those who have exited out, but are now working in the field or the industry, right? So whether they're doing outreach, they work for a provider, some work with counties, a variety of different positions. But I'll say there's a couple things that the message falls in line with what was portrayed here today, which is income is not enough, right? So for folks who are either currently experiencing homelessness or, in shelter or supportive housing, anything like that, but folks who are receiving benefits, the benefits is never enough, even if they are, if they're linked to a variety of different sources of unearned income, and also those who are working like can't earn enough, right? So to keep up with rent, with bills. So it's just this is copy paste across the state. It feels like, you know, nothing can. It just feels like nobody can really earn enough to keep up. So I will say everyone wants to fight. Everybody wants to fix this problem. I don't know if it's rent control or what across the board. But I think, thank you, Matt, all those policies, I'm sure everybody will push to whatever capacity they possibly can, but it's just not enough to sustain for, I think, all folks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Raquel. Right. So folks, right, one of the things here, if there's additional questions that you have, right, that you want to discuss, or there's things that you want answers to, if there's more that you want covered, please just feel free to enter into the chat now. We're going to keep the chat open for the next 15 minutes, right? But that being said, right, one of the things that we will be doing is we will be aggregating any questions asked and kind of putting out an FAQ on that. Right. So lastly, I just want to say thanks, and I want to kick it back over to Janelle Winter in order to close this out. So Janelle.
Sorry, you caught me without my glasses on as I was peering in to read what everybody was writing in the chat. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank Thaisa and Kate and Matt for their presentations. I think they've, give us all really a good look at what people are working on across the state, what there is for all of us to work on. I want to thank Raquel for what she shared with us. And of course, Mike and his team and Renee for what they presented as well. I also want to let you know that at DCA, we are committed to supporting our entire community of providers and stakeholders and everyone who's working on these issues. There's a lot going on right now. Coming through the budget season, seeing what's happening at the federal levels, these are things that can, I think, give us a lot of, they can give us a lot of pause. I think what I'm thinking now, though, is, well, what I'm thinking is I might have actually jinxed myself, because a little while ago I was thinking about everything we accomplished through the COVID period. And I thought, certainly would never want to live through that again. But that sense of urgency everybody had that they brought to that work, man, I wish I hope we can find a way to sustain that and bring that to the work that we do now. And well, we certainly are. There are many things that I think are inspiring us to do that. But I think that sense of urgency really is what we should always have felt about this issue. It's an emergency to see someone on the street. It's an emergency to see someone without a home. It is unfortunately an emergency that has lasted in our society for so long that sometimes it doesn't feel emergent anymore. It feels like part of what we do when we maintain the status quo. And, some people just want to never have to look at it again. And some people, just think, well, I don't know what to do. It just always seems to be around. But I think what we know from the data we've heard, from what's been shared, from the work that's been done, is that there absolutely are things that we can do to really address this issue and to end this emergency. And I think that if we go ahead and bring that sense of urgency and compassion and commitment to this work, we will be able to do it. I'm inspired every day when I see and hear the work of our teams at DCA, who absolutely bring their best and whole selves to the work. When I see all the work that all of you are doing, I hope that in this session, we've given you some good information to bring back and to think about and to share with the people that you talk with. And I also hope too that you've gotten some, inspiration for your future work and some support from knowing that everyone here, I think until we hit the time of 3 o'clock, I'm not sure we dip below 600 people at any given time. All the people who are really committed to this and are here to, help each other and support each other as we do our best to get this job done. Thank you to all of you. We'll stress you will be getting the slides, and look forward to speaking with all of you again. Thank you very much for everything that you're doing.